Good morning and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing moves in portability. Okay, this is when you learn how to port your Section 8 voucher to another city. Okay, so it's porting your Section 8 voucher, porting your HUD voucher, or porting your Housing Choice Voucher to another city or to another state. Okay. Look, the process takes a couple of weeks to a couple of months. It's often very convoluted. And I'm going to explain why. But before I do that, I'm going to warn you guys, okay? It's time consuming. It can take hours and days and weeks and sometimes even months to get all this done. Each housing authority has its own policies, procedures, and rules. Housing authorities sometimes don't like to cooperate with each other, especially from different states. And to be frank with you, they make the whole process rather convoluted. And I know that from doing this in several hundred cities, okay? I've seen it over and over and over. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it yourself. There are some high-functioning people out there that don't mind reading hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of federal code and also state code. And so you look through all that information, but I seriously doubt most of you understand the legislation in it. There are loopholes in it where you can compel them, and that's where a consultant comes into play, okay? So this video is also about me offering a consulting services to you. Unlike my normal consulting service where I'm discussing how to get housing, portability, moves in portability and getting you from one state to another takes a lot more time, to be frank with you, okay? Even with a guy with my talents, you're probably looking at 1 to 5 billable hours and even more if it's project-based voucher, because then it has to be converted over and then ported, okay? And we're going to go over all those things here in an 8-minute video. So if you get tired, you're worn out, you don't want to have to deal with this, or you run into a roadblock, or you're just looking for a legal loophole to help propel you to the next agency or to get you to the next state, it would be highly advisable to hire a consultant. You can find all my information in the comments section of the video. Now, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on. So the legislation written out is around a couple hundred pages. The moves and portability instructions they give, which you see on the screen, that's around 39 pages with about, 20 to 30 chapters. You'll find a link to that in the description. You're welcome to read through it, okay? But this is a boilerplate direction that the federal government gives to housing authorities. The housing authorities take this and then they expand it into a whole lot of other different things, okay? So while it is useful to learn a little bit about portability, it is not a definitive guide, and this by itself will not help you get very far into the process. It only kind of enlightens you of how all this works. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of scroll down. You can see there's a lot of things involved, and there's a lot of sub-chat, and it goes on. I mean, it's 5 pages, 3 pages of just subsections on it, okay? So, a lot of you guys have in your mind, I'll just call the housing authority, they'll give me a form, I'll sign it, and I'll just move to the next housing authority. It's, trust me, it's not that simple, okay? So, beyond all that, let's take a look at some of the word sheets that I have here prepared, all right? Now, you can look up the federal code. So the Code of Federal Regulation is going to be E-CFR, Title 24, Housing Urban Development Regulations relating to housing and urban development, Chapter IX, Office of Assistant Secretary, Public and Indian Housing Affairs. And then, of course, you have a nice, long, juicy read for a couple of hours. And I'm not trying to disappoint you here, but that's how it goes. So let's get into the facts of the case here. So if you want to do this, you first have to reach out to your housing authority, okay? And what you're going to find so convoluted about the process is the fact that cities and states, so a housing authority is actually run by your city, and if not the city, then the state itself, okay? Just trying to get somebody that has a high enough IQ on the phone to help you is going to be a difficult task at a housing authority, trust me, when it comes to that, because they often are very resistant to want to talk about portabilities and moves. If you manage to get past that, you're going to usually find that they hide the information on their website. You can even do an open search on their website, and they'll put as little information as possible. That's because they want to keep the money and funding in their city. So they make this as difficult as possible, in my opinion. When you manage to actually get through all of that, and they do mail a packet or RTF packet, and it's the responsibility of the housing authority. So they have to spend their time for free mailing the RTF packet from their housing authority, which they are the receiving housing authority, to the processing housing authority. Then we get into issues of billing and absorbing. So I'm going to take those two unique words I love to use. The billing part means simply this. Okay, so I'm in New York, and I'm going to move to Miami. So what would happen on a billing situation is Miami, if you move to Miami, then Miami Housing Authority will send a bill to New York. So New York has to take its private funding and continue to cut a check to Miami for you to be there. Do you see why a housing authority might not like for you to go there? You know, it's a permanent bill, but you don't even live in the city. So that's why all this becomes convoluted. Now, the absorbing part is possibly an easier path if both housing authorities agree to that. The absorbing part is actually like it sounds. They absorb you, and by absorbing you, they say, relinquish we see that you already qualify in that state. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you fill out a form just like you just applied in our own city, and then you terminate your relationship with the city of New York, and then you apply through us, and then we'll absorb you. In other words, they're going to give you a free pass into their system, and then they're going to give you housing. So they absorb you, and you relinquish all control for what you did in New York, which means New York no longer has to send a bill down to Miami, okay? And this is in principle one of the small factors of what goes on. Now, what I should also mention is besides trying to get your normal housing authority you're currently dealing with to cooperate, they can spend weeks trying to send an RTF packet. Then it has to be received by, let's say, Miami. And then Miami has to spend several weeks reviewing that information. And then, of course, you have to meet all of their criteria, just as if you had always lived in Miami and this was your first time applying for housing authority over there. So you'd have to meet all the income requirements, all special requirements, and of course, it's a negative bonus point, the fact that you aren't actually a current citizen of the city. So yeah, it's convoluted, trust me. Beyond all that, let's talk about something besides Housing Choice Voucher. So Housing Choice Voucher obviously is the one that you can use to port, okay? So if you have a project-based voucher, I think they... PVA, let's just call it project-based voucher. So what happens there is the funding from the city is tied to the unit, not you. So the voucher itself is tied to where you're living. So you cannot teleport your apartment to Miami. You see what I'm saying? So what happens is you have to go back to your housing authority, and we have to go through a whole other process, which is called converting your project-based voucher over to a tenant-based voucher. Once we get you a tenant-based voucher, then we can convert that to a housing choice voucher, and then you can port, and that's a process. They have to be compelled, and a lot of them will pretend or even deny that you can do that, but I understand Section 923.261, which allows you to do that. If you've held your lease for at least 12 months in a project-based voucher, then they have to allow you the opportunity to switch over to a tenant-based voucher. Okay, so in that in itself is a whole nother video, and like I said, it's one of those things that's convoluted and it's also complicated. Now, if you're funded, say you've got private funding, big cities like San Francisco, New York. Not only do they have the housing authority, they have a lot of private organizations that issue vouchers. So a lot of those vouchers that they're funding, they receive money from the federal government, but they're not a housing authority. And so these vouchers they're giving you are absolutely tied to the city and cannot be ported at all. A lot of the people that contact me about being formerly homeless, the guy who got some voucher through different organizations and charities, those types of vouchers have a 50-50 chance where you may or may not be able to port that voucher to another city and state, okay? Now, the good news is I have an excellent reputation of sending people to great places. Let me tell you something about portability and moves. And if you're low income and you're likely to be in low income for a long time, let me tell you something. You don't need to live in a neighborhood full of drug activity and gang activity, and it's just downtrodden, okay? I had one tenant, not a tenant, I had one client. She figured, well, if I'm going to be low income, might as well do it in a tropical island. And I mailed her and her stuff basically down to Puerto Rico. I had another lady that wanted to go to Hawaii. It was a process, but I got her down there. So I want to tell you guys, you don't have to suffer through living in a terrible city or a terrible neighborhood. You can simply port yourself somewhere nicer. You can go up to Oregon, maybe to Washington, somewhere up in the Midwest, maybe the lower East Coast. I would heavily avoid southern states. not because they're Southern, but because the funding is very low, and you might find that crime and things like that are still high. I'm a Southerner. I come from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I can tell you that our city has a wonderful culture and stuff like that, but there's no way in hell I would port there. So with all that being said, so, the reality of it is here, if you're high functioning, you got a high IQ, and you want to go through all this and spend 200-300 hours figuring out how to go through all these processes, you can do it yourself. That's fine. If you reach a roadblock, you can't do it no more. Hire a consultant. If you just lost patience and you're tired of being put on hold and being given roadblocks here and there, hire a consultant. There's a lot of situations. Now, look, you can go through the whole process, and you still only have a 50-50 chance, because you can go through the whole thing, get everything, the RTF packet sent down there, the other housing authority could approve it, and then at the last minute they can deny it, okay? So that's another reason why you have a consultant, because, there's a certain process you go through to ensure that if they're going to accept you down there, that it's actually going to come to fruition and happen, and then you're not just left standing on the sidewalk with nowhere to go, okay? It is a perilous adventure to do all this. It's a lot more complicated than even me trying to help you guys get a voucher. It's actually simpler for you to get a voucher than it is for you to port it, okay? So a lot of time, energy, and effort goes into this. So I would recommend that you hire a consultant and that you budget appropriately, okay? Because 1 to 5 billable hours, I'm at $40 for a half hour. So you can imagine it costs a couple $100. But a couple $100 to move to a tropical island or a better city is one heck of a good investment. So I'm sorry I couldn't go into a lot of detail about the specifics of what you need to do, because here's the reality. There's 5,400 cities. Every city and housing authority has a very set of specific rules, and how those rules would apply would continually change, because it would depend on what city, housing authority, and the different city you would go to, and then of course their policies and procedures would affect how yours does. So nobody can claim to make a video on YouTube saying that, I have the definitive guide to doing this. That's absurd and childish. So with all that being said, I hope that you'll be able to get some insight, and I will give you, like I said, the federal code and also the housing authority moves and portability aspect. Like I said, it's to enlighten and enrich you, but it's not a definitive guide to get you anywhere. For those of you that have managed to get through the process on your own, I commend you. You got lucky. And when I mean lucky, you just got lucky, all right? So I'm wishing you all to have a good morning, and if you need to reach me, my information is down in the comments section, and I'll be happy to consult with you and then see if we can get you through the process. Goodbye.